I always believed being the good daughter meant fixing every mess in silence until a text message proved my family wasn't just ungrateful, they were dangerous. My name is Kate Wilson. For years, I was the invisible safety net my brother used to survive his own mistakes. They thought I was weak because I was quiet. They didn't realize that while they were forging my signature on loan documents to steal my future, I was gathering the evidence to expose them. When they tried to sacrifice me to save their reputation, I didn't just walk away. I burned the bridge while they were still standing on it. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The air conditioning in my Austin office was set to a precise 68 degrees, a sharp contrast to the sweltering Texas heat radiating off the glass even this late in the afternoon. It was Friday. The kind of Friday where the rest of the city was already ordering margaritas on patios, but I was still here running the final integrity diagnostics on a massive cybersecurity overhaul for a regional hospital network. I preferred the silence of the empty office. It was clean, predictable, and logical. Everything my life outside these walls was not. I watched the status bar creep toward 100%, the blue light of the monitors reflecting in the darkening window, showing me a woman in a tailored blazer who looked nothing like the person my family thought I was. My phone buzzed against the mahogany desk, the sound loud in the quiet room. It wasn't a work notification. Those came through on an encrypted channel. This was the specific jarring vibration of the family group chat. I hesitated before flipping it over. A notification from Brooke Carter Wilson, my younger brother Eli's wife, sat on the lock screen. My stomach tightened with a familiar conditioned reflex of dread. I unlocked the phone expecting a request for money or a passive-aggressive comment about my lack of visitation. What I saw was far more direct. Brooke had written, "Hey Kate, don't come to the BBQ Sunday. You always make things awkward. Let us have one peaceful day as a real family." I stared at the pixels, waiting for the punchline or maybe a correction. Surely this was a mistake. But then the bubbles appeared, indicating others were typing. I watched in real time as my parents Ron and Denise weighed in. There was no defense of their daughter, no scolding of their daughter-in-law for being rude. Instead, my father reacted to the message with a ha-ha emphasis tag. My mother followed a second later with LOL Brooke, "You are terrible." Then a separate message from Mom. "Maybe next time, Kate. It's probably for the best." The breath left my lungs. They weren't just excluding me, they were erasing me from the family narrative in real time, and they were laughing about it. They viewed my absence not as a loss, but as a relief. To them, I was still the awkward, intense girl who sacrificed fun for school and ended up alone with computers. They imagined I lived a small, sad life, probably paycheck to paycheck in a cramped apartment, unable to socialize like a normal human being because I was too rigid, too serious. They thought they were doing me a favor by cutting me out, saving themselves the embarrassment of my presence. They had no idea. I looked around my corner office, the city lights of Austin beginning to twinkle below. They didn't know that the computer stuff they dismissed was actually me leading a team of elite engineers defending critical infrastructure from state-sponsored cyber attacks. They didn't know I cleared 6 figures easily, that I owned a pristine downtown condo with a view of the river, or that my modest sedan was paid off in cash because I didn't believe in unnecessary debt. I had built a fortress of success specifically to protect myself from the instability they thrived on, but because I didn't flaunt it, because I didn't need them to validate it, they assumed I had nothing. The vibration of the phone felt like an insult now. It triggered a cascade of memories, a highlight reel of every time I had been asked to diminish myself so Eli could shine. I remembered the day I handed over my college fund, the savings from 3 years of lifeguarding and tutoring, to pay for Eli's lawyer after his DUI. I remembered the car accident that wasn't his fault except it was, and how my parents looked at me with pleading eyes until I covered the deductible. I remembered asking my parents to be a reference for my first apartment, only to hear them say I was independent and didn't need help, while weeks later they co-signed a lease for Eli because he needed a soft landing. The voice of my father echoed in my head, a memory from 10 years ago that still dictated the architecture of my life. You're strong, Katie. You'll be fine. Your brother needs us more. That was the pattern. I was the sacrificial lamb, the one strong enough to be bled dry so Eli could survive his own mistakes. They thought I was weak because I was quiet, but they had confused silence with submission. I looked at the chat one last time. I could have typed a paragraph detailing my salary, my title, or the fact that I had bailed them out more times than they could count. Instead, I typed 2 words. Got it. I flipped the phone face down. I didn't block them. I didn't leave the chat. I simply went back to my work. When my family tried to erase me, they forgot one crucial thing about my profession. I keep logs. I keep receipts. And I don't make threats. I execute protocols. Just as I was closing my laptop, my office intercom buzzed. It was my assistant sounding confused. Ms. Wilson, I'm sorry to disturb you so late, but there are 2 people at the front desk. They don't have an appointment, but they're insisting it's urgent. They said it's about a life-changing family investment opportunity. I frowned, pulling up the security feed on my second monitor. The camera in the lobby showed a woman pacing aggressively in a fast-fashion suit and a man shrinking behind her. I zoomed in. The name on the visitor log read Eli Wilson. I had come into the office on Saturday morning not because I had to, but because the silence of the empty floor was the only thing that drowned out the echo of yesterday's text message. I was finalizing a security audit for a pending product launch, immersing myself in the binary comfort of code when the front desk phone chirped. It was the weekend security guard sounding harassed. He told me there was a couple in the lobby demanding to speak to whoever handles angel investments and refusing to leave until they saw a decision maker. Before I could tell him to turn them away, the elevator chimed down the hall. The glass doors to my suite swung open and my stomach dropped. Brooke strutted in, dressed in what I assumed was her idea of a tech CEO uniform, a stark white blazer, oversized designer sunglasses, and heels that clicked aggressively on the polished concrete floors. Eli shuffled behind her, looking like a child dragging his feet on the way to the principal's office. They stopped dead when they saw me. I wasn't the sister they ignored in group chats. I was sitting behind a glass desk with a nameplate that read, Director of Cybersecurity, framed by the sleek, backlit logo of a company they clearly hadn't realized I worked for. Brooke froze, her sunglasses sliding down her nose. Her eyes darted from the high-end ergonomic chairs to the wall of server monitors, and finally to me. You work here, she asked, her voice losing its practiced bravado. This is your office. I didn't stand up. I didn't offer them water. I just waited. Recovering her composure with impressive speed, Brooke marched forward and slammed a glossy spiral-bound pitch deck onto my desk. The cover shouted meaningless buzzwords: disruptive telehealth platform, AI diagnostics, and synergy. We're here for seed money, Brooke announced, smoothing her hair. We need $500,000. It's just a little angel investment. Family helps family, right? Eli stepped up beside her, parroting the line he'd clearly been rehearsed on. Yeah, Katie, family looks out for family. He tried a winning smile, but it looked brittle. Come on, you don't want to be the reason we miss our big shot. This is huge. I opened the folder. It took me less than 30 seconds to dismantle their dream. I pointed to the proprietary algorithm page. This is a screenshot of a basic WordPress plugin. I said, my voice flat. I flipped to the team page. And your chief technology officer is a stock photo model. I've seen this exact man on 3 different dental insurance pamphlets. Brooke's face reddened. That's just a placeholder. You're focusing on the wrong things. I'm focusing on fraud, I said. I closed the folder and pushed it back toward them. No. The silence that followed was heavy. Brooke's mask of professional ambition slipped, revealing the snarling entitlement beneath. No, she shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls. You're just jealous. You're bitter because you're sitting here alone on a Saturday while we're building an empire. You're choosing your cold, dead job over your own family. I'm choosing not to fund a scam, I replied. You really want everyone here to think you're heartless, Brooke yelled, gesturing wildly at the empty desks. That you let your own brother drown when you have all this? I didn't shout back. I simply pressed the button under my desk. Two uniformed security officers appeared in the doorway a moment later. They didn't need to say anything. Their presence was enough. Brooke gasped, looking between me and the guards. "You're kicking us out. We're your family. You're trespassing," I said. As the guards escorted them out, Brooke was screaming about lawsuits and how I would regret this. Her voice fading as the elevator doors slid shut. The office returned to its hum, but my hands were shaking. I had been ambushed in my own workplace, the one sanctuary I had built away from them. But they hadn't realized they'd just walked into the one arena where they couldn't control the story. Here facts mattered. My phone buzzed on the desk. Eli was calling. I ignored it. Then he called again, and again. I needed to ground myself, so I opened my banking app, intending to transfer my paycheck into savings, a ritual that usually calmed me. But the screen didn't show my usual balance. It showed a notification. "Congratulations. Your pre-approval is ready." I clicked it, confused. I hadn't applied for anything. The screen loaded a loan application for $300,000. The primary borrower was listed as Eli Wilson. The secondary was Brooke Carter Wilson. And they're listed as the co-signer with verified income was Kate Wilson. My breath hitched. They hadn't just used my name. They had used my social security number. I clicked into the details and saw the documents uploaded for proof of income, old pay stubs I had left in a box at my parents' house years ago, alongside a printout of a public profile listing my current position. They had done this before coming here. The pitch meeting wasn't the plan. It was the distraction. I dialed the bank's fraud line immediately, my fingers cold. "This is Kate Wilson," I told the automated system bypassing the menus. When a representative finally clicked on, I started to explain that I hadn't authorized the application. The representative typed for a moment, then paused. "Ms. Wilson, I see the flag on this application. But, are you also calling about the other recent inquiries linked to your social security number?" I froze. "What other inquiries?" "We see a pattern here," the voice on the line said gravely. "This isn't the first time this month someone has tried to use your credentials. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a desperate one-time reach. It was a campaign." I spent the next hour in a state of cold mechanical efficiency. I didn't scream and I didn't cry. Instead, I instructed the bank's fraud department to kill the loan application flag, my social security number for high-level identity theft, and freeze every account associated with my name. The representative was apologetic, but I wasn't listening to the platitudes. I was listening for the confirmation codes. Once the call ended, I sat in the silence of my office and pulled my full credit reports from all three bureaus. The damage was worse than a single loan application. There were two other recent hard inquiries for high-limit credit cards, both denied, and one approved store credit card for a luxury home goods retailer that I had never set foot in. The balance was already $3,000. They weren't just asking for help or making a desperate mistake. They were systematically planning to erase me from my own financial life, dismantling the credit history I had built perfectly over a decade just to fund a lifestyle they felt entitled to. I left the office in a daze, the drive home a blur of highway lights and simmering rage. When I arrived at my condo building, the doorman handed me a heavy, plain manila envelope. "This was dropped off for you, Ms. Wilson. No courier just left at the desk." There was no return address, just my name typed on a label. I took it upstairs, the weight of it feeling significant in my hands. Inside my apartment, I sat at the kitchen island and tore the seal. A single sheet of paper fluttered out, first the back of an old utility bill. I recognized the shaky slanted handwriting immediately. "I've been worried for a while, but didn't know how to bring it up. If you can handle this, please do. I'm sorry. Dad." I stared at the note. If you can handle this. Even in his confession, he was putting the burden of action on me. I reached into the envelope and pulled out the rest of the contents, a thick bound report from a private investigator titled Subject Brooke Carter. My parents had hired a PI. They had known something was wrong, and instead of warning me, instead of protecting their daughter, whose identity was being stolen, they had gathered intelligence and stayed silent. I opened the report. It was a catalog of devastation. It documented Brooke's life before she met Eli, a history completely different from the struggling marketing consultant story we'd been fed. There was a marriage license to a man named Jordan Reyes, a small business owner from Houston. The report detailed how Brooke had convinced Jordan to max out 5 credit cards for a beauty brand launch that never existed. It showed the bankruptcy filings that followed. Jordan lost his house, his business, and his credit rating. Brooke walked away, clean, her name absent from the worst of the debt because she had never legally signed the loans. She had just convinced him to do it. I flipped the pages, my stomach churning. The report moved to the present. Current debts in Brooke's name included 6-figure credit card balances spread across a dozen accounts. Then came the banking traces, multiple personal loans taken out in Eli's name over the last 12 months, with the funds immediately transferred to an account solely controlled by Brooke. And finally, pages of social media screenshots, Brooke posing with designer bags, checking into expensive resorts, and bragging about building an empire, all on posts hidden from Eli's account, but visible to the public. I dropped the folder onto the counter. The betrayal wasn't just the money. It was the silence. My parents knew. They knew she was a predator. They knew Eli was drowning. But they hadn't stepped in. They hadn't warned me to lock down my credit. They had watched, held their breath, and let me become the backup plan if Eli's new life went bad. They were waiting for the inevitable crash, banking on the fact that when the dust settled, responsible Katie would step in to clean up the mess just like I always did. They hadn't protected me. They were hoarding the truth, terrified of the scandal, willing to let me be collateral damage to preserve the illusion of a happy family. I looked from the PI report to my dad's pathetic note. "I'm sorry." "No," I whispered to the empty room. They were hoping I would read this panic and quietly pay off the debts to save Eli from prison and the family from shame. They wanted me to fix it in the shadows. But something inside me, the part that had spent a lifetime seeking their approval, finally snapped. It didn't break, it hardened. If they were willing to sacrifice me in silence, I'd save myself in daylight. I stood up and poured a glass of water, my hands steady now. A new thought struck me, a cold realization about leverage. I opened my laptop and navigated to the county property records database. I typed in the address of the suburban house where Eli and Brooke lived, the house where they were planning that barbecue, the house where they played happy family. I waited for the page to load, needing to see it with my own eyes, to confirm the nuclear option I held in my back pocket. The deed appeared on the screen. Owner Catherine Wilson, co-owners none. I stared at my name on the deed as the sole owner, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like the person holding the match. The screen of my laptop glowed with the undeniable truth of the property records. 1420 Maple Ridge Drive. Owner Catherine Wilson. There were no co-signers, no shared equity, just my name standing alone. I had bought the 3-bedroom suburban ranch 3 years ago, back when Eli was finding himself after a bout of unemployment and what my parents called situational depression. They had pleaded with me then, framing it as a savvy investment for my portfolio and a necessary fresh start for my brother. They swore Eli would pay rent, that he would take care of the place, that I was the hero of the family. I sat back in my chair, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in my apartment. The mortgage for that house had been auto-drafted from my primary checking account on the 1st of every month for 36 months without fail. I had treated it like a bill to be paid to keep the peace, a subscription fee for my family's love. But staring at the deed now alongside the PI report and the fraudulent loan application, the picture shifted. They didn't just lean on me for support. They had built the entire infrastructure of Eli's life out of my bones. The realization unlocked a vault of memories I had carefully suppressed, vignettes of a lifetime spent as the fuel for Eli's fire. I thought of my high school graduation party, standing in the backyard while my father pulled me aside, his hand heavy on my shoulder. I expected a check, or maybe just a well done. Instead, he told me they needed to temporarily borrow the $4,000 in my savings account money I had scraped together from babysitting and summer jobs to pay for Eli's legal fees after a vandalism incident. "You're so strong, Katie," he had said, his eyes wet with performative gratitude. "You can earn it back. Your brother needs a clean slate." I remembered college, working double shifts at a diner while taking 18 credit hours, exhausted to the point of illness, while Eli took time off to travel and find his center. I remembered the Christmas I came home with an envelope of cash for Eli because he was short on rent, only to watch my parents gift him a brand new $500 gaming console to keep his spirits up. When I had looked at them confused, my mother had simply whispered, "Family takes care of each other." I finally understood what that phrase meant in the Wilson lexicon. It meant I took care of them, and they took care of Eli. I leaned forward and logged into the mortgage portal. My finger hovered over the auto-pay toggle. For 3 years I had ensured the roof over their heads was secure, terrified that if I stopped, I would be the villain who put my brother on the street. But they had already made me the villain. They had tried to steal $300,000 from me. The contract was broken. I clicked Disable. The status changed to Manual Payment Required. Next, I opened my email and drafted a new message to my real estate attorney, a shark of a woman named Patel, who had handled the closing. The subject line was sharp and final. "Prepare 30-day notice to vacate. 1420 Maple Ridge." Doctor, I didn't offer an explanation. I simply attached the deed and hit send. Then I scheduled an emergency meeting with a fraud specialist for Monday morning to formally dispute the unauthorized credit inquiries. I placed extended fraud alerts and full security freezes on all 3 of my credit bureau files. I was locking the gates. My phone rang, shattering the focus. It was my mother. I debated ignoring it, but I needed to hear their spin. I answered on the second ring. "What did you do to Eli and Brooke at your office?" Her voice was sharp, vibrating with that specific tone of accusation she reserved only for me. "They called me in tears. They said you called security on them like they were criminals, that you threatened them." "I didn't threaten them," I said, my voice frighteningly calm. "I stopped them from committing fraud. Did they tell you they tried to take out a $300,000 loan in my name using stolen documents?" There was a pause, but not of shock. It was the pause of someone recalibrating an excuse. "You know your brother isn't good with paperwork, Kate," she said, her voice dropping to a plead. "Brooke is just trying to help him get this business off the ground. She's ambitious. Don't overreact. We're family." "Identity theft isn't a paperwork error, Mom. Let's handle this without lawyers, Katie." My father's voice chimed in from the background, muffled, as if he was leaning close to the speakerphone. "Please, your mother can't handle that kind of drama. Just come to the BBQ tomorrow and we'll talk it out. We can fix this." I listened to the fear in his voice. He wasn't afraid of what Eli had done. He was afraid of people finding out. They were more terrified of a public scene than they were of their son's moral bankruptcy. They wanted me to come to the BBQ, smile, and let them sweep the shards of my financial security under the rug so the neighbors wouldn't hear the glass breaking. "I'll be there," I said. "Good." Mom exhaled, relieved. "Good. We'll see you tomorrow. Just bring a salad, okay?" I hung up. A bitter clarity washed over me. They were begging me not to blow up the illusion. They didn't realize that by trying to erase me to keep their picture clean, they had left me with nothing to lose. If they wanted to play happy family in public, I would give them a performance they would never forget. A notification popped up on my laptop calendar: Memorial Day BBQ. Parents' house, 1 p.m. I stared at the event, then looked down at the PI folder full of damning evidence and the deed that proved I owned the ground they stood on. For the first time in days, I smiled. The Memorial Day sun was bright enough to bleach the color out of the world, casting harsh shadows across my parents' backyard. It was a scene straight out of a detergent commercial. American flag, bunting draped along the cedar fence, the thick, savory smoke of ribs rising from the grill, and the sound of generic country music drifting from portable speakers. The yard was packed. Not just family, but the specific audience my parents curated like a museum exhibit: the church deacons, the nosy neighbors from the homeowners association, the people whose validation served as the currency of my mother's life. I walked through the side gate at exactly 1 o'clock. I wasn't carrying a bowl of potato salad or a six-pack of beer. I was carrying a thick reinforced manila folder. The chatter died down in a ripple effect silence spreading outward from the patio as people noticed me. It was clear Brooke had done her work. The confused glances told me she had likely spun a story about poor Kate being too busy with work to show up, or perhaps too bitter to attend. My mother, standing near the cooler, froze with a plastic cup in her hand. Her eyes darted to the neighbors, her smile stretching thin and brittle. "Kate," she chirped, her voice an octave too high. We didn't think you were coming. We're all here to have a good time. Okay? Just a nice, relaxed day." Brooke was standing by the grill with Eli playing the role of the doting daughter-in-law, laughing at something my dad had said. She looked up, and for a split second her eyes went wide with genuine fear before the mask slammed back into place. She stepped forward, smoothing her sundress. "Well, look who decided to join the family," she said loud enough for the back row to hear. "Grab a plate, Kate. Don't just stand there." I walked past her, ignoring the offered paper plate. I went straight to the long picnic table in the center of the patio, currently laden with cornbread and coleslaw. With a sweep of my arm, I cleared a space in the center, pushing the serving dishes aside. "I didn't come to eat," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden hush it carried. I opened the folder. One by one, I began to lay the documents out on the plastic tablecloth, like a dealer revealing a royal flush. "This," I said, placing the first document down, "is the deed to the house at 1420 Maple Ridge Drive. You'll notice the only name on it is mine. This," I continued, laying down the next sheet, "is the formal 30-day notice to vacate, which was legally served this morning via certified mail." I placed the mortgage statement next to it. "This shows the payment missed yesterday after I removed my banking information." Then came the kill shot. "And this is the fraud investigation letter from the bank regarding an attempted $300,000 loan taken out in my name, using my social security number by Eli Wilson and Brooke Carter Wilson." Finally, I dropped the PI report open to the page detailing Brooke's previous husband's bankruptcy and the string of maxed-out credit cards in her wake. The silence was absolute. Then the sound of shattering ceramic broke the spell. Eli had dropped his plate. BBQ sauce and potato salad splattered across the patio pavers, but he didn't move. He just stared at the papers. Brooke let out a sharp, jagged laugh, looking around at the neighbors. "Oh my God, Kate! Is this a joke? You're so dramatic. It's a misunderstanding." "Kate, please!" Mom hissed, rushing forward and trying to cover the papers with her hands. Her face was pale, her eyes pleading. "Let's take this inside, right now. We don't need to do this here." "No," I said, pulling the papers out from under her trembling hands. "You were willing to let me be ambushed in my own office. You used my name, my credit, and my life. You sacrificed me in private to keep this image intact, so we're going to tell the truth in public." I turned to the crowd, then back to my family. "You all let me pay for a house I don't live in. You let Eli steal my identity because you didn't want to admit he's a failure. And you," I looked at Brooke, "have done this before." Eli collapsed. He didn't just sit. He fell to his knees, grabbing the hem of my jeans, weeping openly. "Please, Katie, don't do this. Don't threaten my home. We'll fix it. Just help us this one last time. I swear I'll pay you back." I stepped back, letting his hands slip off me. "No more last times." Brooke's face twisted. The influencer mask dissolved, revealing pure venom. "You're jealous!" she screamed, stepping over Eli to get in my face. You can't stand that Eli has a real family and you don't. You're alone with your stupid job and your empty condo, so you're trying to erase what we built because you're miserable. Is any of this true? The question came from my father. He was standing by the grill looking old and gray. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Brooke. Brooke spun around. Ron, she's lying. Is it true? Dad repeated, his voice shaking. Brooke hesitated, her eyes darting for an escape, but the PI report lay open on the table, damning her in black and white. She didn't answer. She just sneered. I felt a wave of sorrow wash over me, followed by a cleansing clarity. This was the family I'd been begging to belong to, I thought. The one that kept choosing lies over me. I am cutting off all financial support effective immediately, I announced, my voice steady. Eli Brooke, you have 30 days. If you are not out, the sheriff will remove you. And if my identity is used for so much as a library card, I will press criminal charges. I looked at my parents, then at my brother sobbing on the ground. You didn't just hurt me. You threatened my life, my freedom, and my future. If blood really means something, you never showed it. I closed the empty folder. I didn't look back as Eli wailed or as Brooke began to scream obscenities at my back. I walked out of the yard past the stunned neighbors and the silent church friends, leaving the smell of sizzling meat and a ruined holiday behind me. The fallout didn't happen all at once. It arrived in waves, starting with the digital explosion that night. I sat on my couch, a glass of wine untouched on the coffee table, watching my phone screen light up like a chaotic strobe in the dark room. The family group chat, which had been a source of exclusion only days ago, was now a weapon of mass guilt. My mother led the charge, her messages arriving in rapid-fire bursts. "How could you be so cruel?" she wrote. "To humiliate your brother like that? It's unchristian, Kate. You've hardened your heart against your own blood." Then came the extended family, aunts and cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years, but suddenly had strong opinions about airing dirty laundry and the sanctity of forgiveness. They painted me as the bitter spinster tearing down a young family, convenient villains in a narrative they didn't understand. Then came Eli. His texts were a frantic stream of consciousness, oscillating between rage and pathetic begging. "You're ruining my life," one said. Then seconds later, "Please, Katie, you're all I have. Don't erase me from your life. I'm scared." I read them all, feeling the familiar tug of obligation, the conditioned reflex to fix it, to smooth it over, to pay the bill just to make the phone stop buzzing. But then I looked at the folder on my counter, the PI report, the fraud alert. I didn't reply. I didn't argue. I simply pressed mute conversation and set the phone face down. The silence that followed was eerie, a vacuum where the chaos used to be. But for the first time, I didn't rush to fill it. In the days that followed, the emotional storm was replaced by the cold, grinding gears of legal machinery. My real estate attorney, Patel, was efficient and unsentimental. She confirmed that the 30-day notice to vacate had been legally served and signed for, likely by a weeping Eli or a furious Brooke. I had stopped paying the mortgage the moment I discovered the fraud, and without my funds, the loan immediately went into default. Because the house was in my name, the bank contacted me first. I explained the situation clearly. The property was occupied by tenants who were refusing to leave, and I was surrendering the asset. The foreclosure process began with terrifying speed. Meanwhile, the bank's fraud division wasn't as gentle with Eli and Brooke. Because I had flagged the unauthorized loans and refused to acknowledge the debt, the bank sent a formal demand to them for the investigation fees and a stark warning that the file was being prepared for criminal referral. They were no longer dealing with a sister they could manipulate. They were dealing with a corporate entity that wanted its money. The shockwaves hit the community too. I expected to be a pariah, and in some circles I was. At the grocery store, I saw a woman from my parents' church turn her cart around specifically to avoid me. But in the quiet corners of my life, something else happened. A coworker, A quiet woman named Sarah who managed the server farm stopped by my desk a week later. "I heard about what happened," she said, lowering her voice. I braced myself for judgment. Instead, she looked at me with tired eyes. "I've been paying my brother's rent for 6 years. He won't work. He says he can't handle the stress. I haven't taken a vacation in a decade." She paused, then nodded. "You did the brave thing. I wish I could." Later that week, my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable, caught me at the mailboxes. She placed a withered hand on my arm. "Honey, sometimes love looks like no," she said softly. "Enabling isn't loving. It's just slow-motion destruction." It wasn't a victory lap. I wasn't celebrating. I had sleepless nights where I stared at the ceiling wondering if I was a monster. I felt phantom guilt every time I drove past a highway exit that led to the suburbs. But beneath the guilt, I noticed a physical change. My shoulders had dropped 2 inches. The constant low-level hum of anxiety, the fear of the next crisis, the next emergency call was gone. I started looking at travel blogs for the first time in years. I moved money into a retirement account without mentally calculating how much I needed to keep liquid for Eli's next bail or Brooke's next business idea. I realized I hadn't abandoned my family. I had simply refused to let them erase me to keep themselves comfortable. The end came exactly 35 days after the BBQ. I received a notification from my attorney that the foreclosure was finalized. The property had reverted to the bank. A locksmith had been dispatched that morning to secure the premises. I was sitting at my desk, staring at the email when my phone vibrated. It was an unknown number. I knew who it was. I could picture him standing on the sidewalk surrounded by boxes staring at a door that no longer opened for him. I watched the phone ring until it went to voicemail, leaving the line dead and the boundary held. The unraveling of my brother's life wasn't the slow burn I expected. It was a rapid, catastrophic collapse, the kind that happens when you remove the load-bearing wall from a structure built entirely on rot. Without my credit score to shield him and my cash to pad his falls, reality hit Eli with the force of a freight train. It started with the credit bureaus. The fraud alert I placed didn't just stop new loans. It triggered a review of his existing precarious finances. His credit score plummeted to a number so low it was practically radioactive. Then came the job loss. Eli had been working at a high-end auto shop, a job he actually liked, but when the bank's fraud investigation formally flagged his record, it popped up on a routine background check for the shop's insurance renewal. He was let go immediately. Liability, they called it. He was a risk they couldn't insure. Brooke's reaction was predictable to everyone but Eli. For a week or two, she bounced between friends' couches, dragging my brother along like luggage she was increasingly tired of carrying. But when the civil suits started piling up, debt collectors chasing the loans, I had refused to pay threatening wage garnishment on money they didn't even have yet. She cut the cord. She announced she was leaving town to start over and find herself in Nashville. She left Eli in a Motel 6 off the interstate with 3 suitcases of clothes and a mountain of legal notices. She didn't just leave him. She left him to drown in the wake she had created. The devastation didn't stop with them. It bled upward to my parents, just as I feared it would. Without me as the safety net, Ron and Denise Wilson tried to step in. They maxed out their own emergency cards and took out high-interest personal loans to keep Eli afloat, terrified of seeing their son homeless. But they didn't have my income, and they didn't have my discipline. The math caught up to them within 2 months. I heard through a neighbor that the for sale sign went up in front of my childhood home in late June. It sold quickly, likely for less than it was worth, because they needed the cash fast to cover the debts they'd accrued, trying to save Eli from the consequences of his own crimes. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a sprawling beige complex on the edge of town, the kind of place with thin walls and fluorescent hallway lights. My mother left me a voicemail the day they handed over the keys. I listened to it in my car, staring at the steering wheel. Her voice was thick with tears and venom. "You destroyed us, Kate," she sobbed. "We sold the house. Your father is heartbroken. This is not what family does. You watched us drown." I listened to it once. The old Kate would have internalized that acid, letting it burn a hole in her gut. The new Kate pressed delete. I hadn't destroyed them. I had simply stopped being the artificial foundation they had built their dysfunction on. Gravity had destroyed them. I just stepped out from underneath the falling debris. In the space where the guilt used to be, I began to build something real. I started therapy, sitting on a plush chair once a week and dissecting the anatomy of a scapegoat. I learned to say the words, financial abuse, without flinching. I learned that my value wasn't calculated by how much pain I could absorb for others. I channeled that energy outward. I joined a local women in tech organization and started mentoring junior developers. I didn't just teach them Python and security protocols. I taught them about financial independence. I taught them how to lock their credit, how to buy property in their own names, and how to draw hard boundaries with anyone, even family, who viewed their success as a community resource. Seeing them grow fierce and protected healed something in me. And then there was Marcus. We met in the most mundane way possible, a coffee shop spill, but he was everything my family wasn't. He was a paramedic, a man who dealt with genuine life and death emergencies every day, which meant he had zero tolerance for manufactured drama. He didn't need me to save him. He respected my work, my silence, and the walls I had built. When I told him about my family, he didn't tell me to forgive them. He just squeezed my hand and said, "You deserved better protection." I was rebuilding my life on American values that my family claimed, but never practiced: resilience, true community, and personal freedom. I was learning that it was okay to choose myself. I was learning that peace wasn't just the absence of conflict, it was the presence of boundaries. The summer faded into a crisp autumn. I was finally sleeping through the night. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, an email from my attorney popped up. Subject: correspondence from Ron Wilson. The body of the email explained that my father had sent a handwritten letter to her office demanding it be forwarded to me. He had bypassed the digital blocks, the blocked numbers, and the silence. I sat at my desk, my heart doing a slow, heavy thump against my ribs. I hadn't spoken to him since the BBQ. I clicked the attachment, but then I paused. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city I had conquered, the life I had secured. I went back to the desk and printed the letter. I held the paper in my hand for a long moment, feeling the weight of the ink, before I finally unfolded it to see what was left to say. The letter sat on my desk like an unexploded ordnance. It was 3 pages long, written on yellow legal pad paper, the ink uneven where the pen had pressed too hard. My father's handwriting, usually so precise, the handwriting of a man who balanced checkbooks to the penny, was shaky. It looked like the script of a man who had aged 10 years in the last 3 months. I poured a glass of iced tea, the condensation cold against my palm, and forced myself to read it. It wasn't a lecture. It was a confession. "Katie," he wrote, "I need you to know something. I didn't hire that PI after the bank fraud. I hired him 6 months ago. I knew something was wrong with Brooke. I saw the way money disappeared. I suspected she was using Eli. I was just too afraid to be right." I stopped reading, my chest tightening. He had known. He had held the evidence of a predator in his hands, and instead of warning me, the daughter with the good credit, the daughter with the savings account, he had stayed silent. He had hoped that if he ignored it, the problem would vanish. Or perhaps he assumed that when the inevitable crash came, I would just absorb the impact like a human airbag. That was the hardest line to read: an apology for silence. The rest of the letter was a catalogue of misery. He described the small apartment they were living in, how the walls were so thin they could hear the neighbors arguing. He wrote about Mom's constant tears, how she spent her days looking at old photo albums, wondering where they went wrong. He admitted that Eli was sleeping on their couch 3 nights a week, broken and bitter, blaming the world for his downfall. And then the pivot I knew was coming. "We miss you. We want to sit down as a family and try again. We can fix this. It will be different this time. Please, Katie, don't let this be the end of us." I folded the letter and shoved it into my pocket. I couldn't stay in the condo. I needed air. I walked out into the humid Austin night, the city alive with the low rumble of traffic and the distant sound of live music. I walked toward the river, the path illuminated by the soft glow of street lamps. As I walked, I let the memories come, not pushing them away this time. I remembered the good things Dad teaching me to ride a bike without training wheels, his hands steady on the back of the seat. I remembered Mom bringing me hot chocolate during late-night coding sessions in college, stroking my hair and telling me she was proud of how smart I was. They weren't monsters. That would have been easier. If they were villains, I could hate them and be done with it. But they weren't villains. They were weak people who valued their own comfort over my safety. They were parents who loved their son's potential more than their daughter's reality. They had chosen denial over me time and time again, until there was nothing left of me to give. I sat on a bench overlooking the water and composed my response in my head. I didn't feel the white-hot rage I had felt at the BBQ. I didn't feel the desperate need to explain myself that I had felt as a child. I just felt a quiet, heavy certainty. The next morning, I didn't call them. I went to my attorney's office and dictated a formal response. It wasn't cruel, but it was ironclad. I wrote that I loved them because that was true. But I explained that trust is not a switch they could flip just because they were uncomfortable with the consequences of their actions. I told them that I could no longer be the family safety net, the backup plan, or the fixer. I set the terms. If they ever wanted to see me, it would be in a neutral location with a mediator present, and there would be absolutely no discussion of money loans, housing, or help. I ended the letter with a line that felt like closing a heavy door. I won't let you erase me to keep the peace ever again. Time moved differently after that. The frantic, jagged rhythm of crisis was replaced by a steady building beat of progress. Summer bled into a scorching Texas July. On the 4th of July, I found myself at a community park, the air thick with the smell of charcoal and sunscreen. It wasn't a tense family obligation. It was a gathering of the people I had chosen. My mentoring group was there, a circle of brilliant young women debating code and laughing over sodas. Sarah from work was manning the grill. Marcus was sitting next to me on a picnic blanket, his arm draped casually over my shoulders, watching the kids run around with sparklers. A woman I didn't know well, a friend of a friend, sat down across from us, balancing a paper plate. "So, Kate," she asked casually, dipping a chip into salsa, "are you close with your family? Do they live around here?" The question hung in the air. A year ago, I would have lied. I would have made up a story about how busy we all were protecting the image of the perfect Wilson clan. I took a sip of my lemonade and looked her in the eye. "Not really," I said, my voice calm and devoid of shame. "I had to cut them off to protect myself." The woman didn't gasp. She didn't look horrified. She just nodded, a look of understanding crossing her face. "I get that," she said. "Boundaries are hard, but sometimes you have to do it." And then she asked me about my job. It was that simple. The world didn't end because I told the truth. I wasn't defined by being the Wilson family problem anymore. I was just Kate. I had my own deed, my own name, and my own peace. As the fireworks began to crackle overhead, painting the night sky in bursts of gold and red, I leaned back against Marcus. People often ask if I feel guilty if I miss the illusion of the family I tried so hard to save. The truth is simple. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do for your family is refuse to let them sacrifice you one more time. They tried to erase me. I chose to write my own name instead, and I sleep just fine. Kate finally found her peace under those fireworks, proving that sometimes walking away is the strongest step you can take. If you enjoyed this story of reclaiming identity, please hit that subscribe button and share your own experiences with setting hard boundaries down below. We read every single comment of your thoughts and love hearing your perspective. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.